Hey, what up, boxing fans? This is the Rope-A-Dope Report. I'm your host, Chris Carlson. I'm back with another upload. Um, this one pertains to the PBC and Al Haymon. Okay, it's been a while since I've been thinking about doing a video for a while. I figure this is a good time during October when there's not a lot of the world is just a lot of the world. Well, that too, but a lot of boxing world in general is what I meant to say. The boxing world is it's a mild month, right? We got to wait till November, December. We're coming off a hot month in September. And a lot of it is just fight news right now, right? And when there's not many fights in October that interest people, what do people turn to? What do boxing fans turn to? Well, they turn to the business and they turn to certain topics, right? Golovkin Jacobs right now, Tyson Fury, Klitschko, Joshua, that mixture of, potential fight, which I don't think it'll actually happen till next year, but there's been a lot of talk, and most of the talk has been about those subjects, but also the PBC. And as of right now, the main theme, the perception online in boxing forums, on boxing Twitter is what I like to call it, on podcasts, throughout the media, print, especially print. Podcasts tend to be media members, but kind of part-time media members, you know what I mean? Like me. I don't even really call myself a media member, although I do write up on fights and yada, 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 and attend fights and all that, but I'm not getting paid full-time for it or nothing like that, right? I don't do it full-time. But my point is, the perception out there is the PBC is on its last leg, that it's just a matter of time until it's dead and gone. It's completely out of money, right? That's what's going on. It's all mismatches, and they have no money. They're out. They wasted all the money. And speaking of money, on this upload, I'm not going to speak in too much detail about the money, okay? I feel like I can only speak for myself, but I do not have anywhere near enough experience in the financial world to give an educated guess. Okay, I'm just being honest. Okay, you can talk about logic in business. I mean, in a lot of things, right? I mean, logic in boxing. Well, logically, this would make sense, but this is boxing, right? So I feel personally, and this is where I think some fans, well, many fans and media members have, I'm not going to say jumped to conclusions, although some have, because even like Kathy Duva and Nicole Duva, she said that, 6 months into it, this is back in 2015, she said after 6 months, if they don't have a deal or show huge ratings or good enough ratings, they're going to be done. She basically tweeted that, that she doesn't know of a firm or investors that would keep investing beyond that point. And Kathy did use her examples and her experience with that NBC Sports Network and the NBC. That was a little different though, because they didn't do that many actual NBC shows. What they did was good. I'm not ripping her. I'm just saying that sometimes if it was 6 months from now, the next one, or 8 months, it's harder to come back and sell ads and all that. That's what she was saying, how it was really tough for me to go back and sell those ads after one. Even if it was successful, it was just tough. But it was a little different of a deal. Most of the fights were on NBC Sports Network. My point is, for well over a year, we've heard the demise is coming. And like I said, money-wise, if you don't operate as a professional in that industry, the financial industry. I'm not saying you can't have an opinion on it. I'm not saying that it wouldn't even be a very correct assessment of it, right? I'm not saying that. Maybe it would, you know. There are some business logic that applies. No doubt about it. But to me, if you don't have a lot of knowledge, or you're actually actively professionally in the industry, then it's a guessing game. It's a guessing game. And if you haven't been part of a startup with millions of dollars of investment behind you, and I don't mean it has to be your startup, you could be part of the startup company. You could be part of the firm that's putting the money up. You know what I mean? I'm not that, and a lot of these people, media wise, and of course fan wise too, you know, they're not privy to that information. And obviously, it's not like the PBC was going to tell us all their business plan to a T. I don't know really the company that goes out there and tells you every single solitary thing. You know, maybe years later they do. But it is different. Like, I'm not going to mess around much here, okay, in the financials. Having a business and having to have a profit is obviously, you know, what a lot of people have said, business 101. Of course, you're in business to profit. Of course, if you're a nonprofit, right, that's different, but you're in the business to profit. But there's all sorts of types of businesses and when they expect to profit, right? So as far as, I can't believe they spent 400 or 500 million dollars. They wasted all this money. I can't believe they spent it all. First of all, the fund losing money does not mean all that money spent. It's a valuation. It's not a cash flow situation. Although in that valuation, cash flow and foreign sales and ticket sales and some of the fights that they are actually selling, a lot of people think they're all-time buys. That's not true either. They do have minor revenue stream. Now, is it a profit? No, but they do have some revenue coming in. My point is, Thomas Hauser made a 5-piece, which I thought could have been more like a 3 or 4-piece, but it was really well written. And of course, it's Thomas Hauser. He's gonna write well. He's a great writer. He had some quotes in there from Richard Schaefer, and people ran with those quotes, but they only ran with some of the quotes. And one of the quotes was secrecy. We all know Haymon is Mr. Secret. He doesn't do interviews, which I think is detrimental, or at least someone out there, and we'll get into that as well. He literally has like a flip phone. He doesn't like to email or text. He'd rather talk to you or talk to you in person. Now that could be his own taste, but that could also be covering his own footsteps, right? Covering his back, right? Trail, paper trail, or lack thereof. Either way, he's really a secretive guy. And Richard Schaefer said, this guy was so secretive at times when I'm trying to get information, and I know Dan Raphael and several others, media members, that get irritated with this too, and rightfully so. They basically, Schaefer said, I was ready to sell Golden Boy just because he's so secretive. Like, here, dude, have it. I'll work for you or something, you know, with the PBC. I don't know. And you know, that could have been the plan. It did well that someone was trying to buy the Golden Boy, no doubt about it, obviously. And you know, my guess is, this is just speculation, but my guess was, since Golden Boy was already a fine-tuned machine that had some fighters signed and many not signed, that was going to be the the engine, I guess you could say, since I thought by 2013 and early 2014 that Golden Boy had turned into the number one promoter. They had made the best fights at that time, quality wise. I thought they had surpassed Top Rank at that time. That's my opinion. Many think that. I think that. By 2013, or I should say after 2013, that whole chunk of time when they to me, they were producing the best fights. Now, if you can get into financials all you want, I'm just talking about producing the best fights. Now I believe the best promoter is Matchroom Sports with Eddie Hearn the last couple of years. But anyway, Richard Schaefer said that. So people took a couple of things he said, but he also was quoted saying there's no way in hell he spent all that money. And when you read the fund valuation, you have to take in several things. So my point is, if you just look at the purse numbers, and we don't always have the purse numbers for every fight, I realize that. But if you look at the numbers, there's just no way he spent $400 million. It just doesn't. Now, maybe, and this is how ignorant a lot of us are, and I'm including myself in there. I don't know if he got all the money once, if he got installments of it, if they just said, hey, we have this amount of money we're going to give you every year. You're going to have a new budget, and we're going to tighten up that budget. And obviously, the first year to this year, they definitely tightened up the budget, right? The overhead was a little bit smaller than it had been. So my point is, it's like when they say, oh, they're out of money, I don't know about that. I don't know. That's a guessing game, and I'm not going to just look at the fund number and say, oh, it's gone, because many other people say that that's not necessarily. Plus, lawsuits, settlements, was that part of the planned money too? And not just time buys and not just having to pay the fighters? I don't know what all the money was there for, okay? So as far as the negativity with PBC, there's several things. First of all, the first year they threw too much on the wall. Now, that may have been their plan, to just throw it all on the wall and see what sticks, right? That may have been their plan. Either way, it was overkill. And by the way, I know it's probably sacrilegious to some of you out there that just hate Al Haymon and hate the PBC. If you're having problems following the fights, because at times there's so many of them, and you forget to DVR it or whatever, right? And I know this is probably sacrilegious to some of you guys, like your phone would probably burn and you'd go to hell or something. But they do have a calendar, like a schedule that you can just, as they put fights on the schedule, it automatically goes into your phone schedule. Just saying, okay? Like I'm sure that you wouldn't want to do that, because that would be aligning yourself with PBC. But just a heads up to boxing fans out there, because at sometimes there is overkill, right? And last year, definitely, 2015, there was. I remember last October, in 1 week, they had like 4 events. And it's not that I don't love it, because it's awesome, but it's overkill, because one of the events was Cleverly in Fanfara, and that was a hell of a fight, and it kind of got lost, or not kind of, it got lost in the mush of 4 different fights that week. My whole point, though, as far as like the negativity, some of the key things that I totally agree with people on 100% are, like I said, the overkill. Also, the promotion. There were times, I think DeGale Durrell is a good example of a variety of things I'm going to say about the PBC. The location, right? I like those afternoon cards. It kind of drew me back to my childhood and younger days, right? My teenage years, when that would be on in the afternoon. But boxing's not in that place where they can draw people in the afternoon. It's just, it's barely at that, right? It's very rare that happens. It happens, but it's very rare. So they shouldn't have done that one in Boston. And there's other things like people saying Porter and Broner, the Battle of Ohio in Las Vegas. Sure. Should that have been in Ohio? Definitely. So location at times has been an issue. In overall promotion, I think in information, right? I think the fact that they don't have a spokesman. I know Tim Smith has been a guy that here and there, like this year, I've only heard like 3 different things from him the whole year. One was early in the year, one was a little bit middle, but lately he's been saying something like Woodsy. Michael Woods. He was able to get some information from him, but they don't have someone to speak for the PBC or someone to promote these fighters. Lou DiBella, I think, has done a really good job. But Lou can't do it all. And Lou doesn't, along with these other promoters, they get paid to promote it. Now, I don't know if they get a cut on the other end of it for how many tickets they can sell or anything. I don't know about that. But Lou DiBella is a well-known in the boxing, in the boxing world. Well-known, and he's not afraid to speak his mind, and he's not afraid to promote and be vocal about stuff, right? And like I said, maybe Richard Schaefer was the planned figurehead of all this, and he was going to be the lead promoter with Golden Boy. Until that went sour, right? That relationship split up for, very legitimate reasons. But that's what is needed. I think that's the biggest thing they need is someone to speak for the PBC at times, and also someone to promote these fighters. That's the biggest thing for me. But there's plenty to complain about it. There's plenty to rip about it. But obviously on the other end of it, some of the criticisms have been over the top, right? And some of the information that is just not out there in general is both the PBC fault, but also some of the media's fault. Now, originally, when they announced the PBC, right? They did their big, opening press conference. They didn't send an invitation to Dan Raphael. Now, don't quote me on this, okay? Don't quote me on this. But I believe, because it's been a while now, but I believe they sent one to Brian Campbell, which doesn't make sense. If you're gonna send one to ESPN.com, obviously you're gonna send one to Dan Raphael. Okay? So that is what's out there, that he did not get invited. Now, that's unprofessional by PBC. Sure, some media members, including Dan Raphael, are very unprofessional sometimes too. Some of them go with a theme of what's out there, right? Some of them give passes to some fighters, some of them don't. Some of them cush up to certain promoters, some of them don't, right? But the point is, I can understand, especially Dan Raphael and others, obviously like Steve Kim, Gabe Montoya is not really doing what he was doing prior to that extent, writing, but both those guys had already been kicked out of Golden Boy events, with Oscar and Richard Schaefer and Al Haymon. They had already had, a bad run-ins with them. So they obviously weren't going to get invited. And I doubt Steve Kim would have even went by that time. But who knows? So that was dumb. However, and I try to correlate this to, and when I say this isn't just boxing media. If you look at a lot of the talking heads on sports shows now, they let their emotion and their bias, shine brightly. In fact, that's kind of what's selling in sports. So I'm not trying to just single out the media. in boxing, or just Dan either, you know. A lot of these guys are very, very good and they know their stuff. So, and I don't expect Dan to, when somebody else gets a scoop, I don't expect him to send all his readers to like link these scoops. Like, oh, dude, check out this article. Now, we do see other articles written that people retweet or post about certain subjects. Sometimes it has nothing to do with boxing. Sometimes it's just a good piece, and they say, hey, my buddy over at the so-and-so post, check this out. This is a good read. You know, that type of thing. But I don't expect them to promote another person's piece, especially when they didn't get the scoop. So I don't expect that. However, to not, like in the Dan Raphael chats, he gives out information or answers questions a lot. So in those chats from time to time, he's not informed certain people. Because if they're not going to answer his calls and emails, then why should I help them out? So I get it. I totally understand that. However, and this is why there's so much misinformation as well. The fact that they don't have a figurehead, right? And the fact that they don't have promoters talking about their fighters. And we don't have someone to lay out, hey, this is the deal. Here's a scoop. You know, like last year, some people were pissed that Leo Santa Cruz took that Stay Busy fight. But it was really just to lead to that. Well, Espinoza told them, yeah, we're going to get, Frampton wins, we're going to make that fight. Well, you know, we just found out not long ago from Espinoza that they're trying to make that Garcia Thurman. Well, we needed to know that earlier than that. You know what I mean? If you're going to give a guy a Stay Busy fight, tell us why and tell us where his career's headed, what the plan is to an extent. Like I said, you're not going to give every plan away, right? But there was an article in the sportsbusinessdaily.com, Sports Business Daily Global Journal, right? And this one is a free one. I know a lot of people from the Sports Business Journal, they think, oh, you got to pay for it. This one's free. It's called Boxing's Grand New Stage. It was written by Billy King, senior writer. There is a couple years back, there was a top rank, or several years back, there was a top rank article that was labeled very similar. So when you Google it, you'll see. It was April 20th, 420 did, April 20th, Billy King, right? And Haymon, who doesn't give permission for people to talk much, right? And he doesn't talk much. He allowed, and that kind of sounds funny, but he allowed for Ryan Cadwell, for his associate, I think his last name is Ring, he allowed them to do this interview. Mike Ring. It's a longtime attorney, Mike Ring, for Haymon. So they basically detail how the whole plan came together as far as how they, you know, some detail in insight on how it all came together, how Al met him and that person met him. They came together. They pitched to NBC. And there's a lot of information, a lot of good detail in here that people in the boxing world, boxing fans, some media members even, but mostly of them fans, that they don't even know this information. And I'm not saying 100% everything in this article is true. I'm not saying that. Well, it's online, so it's got to be true. You know what I mean? That old thing. No, I read it online, so I'm ready to call it fact, you know. But the point is, if we're going to go off sources, unnamed sources, and then we have sources that are named, then, you know, you tell me. You tell me what to believe and what not to believe, okay? So anyway, it goes through a variety of stuff. It lists the funds, you know, and the potential money. And it also says that there's likely other smaller fund management, whatever, you know. So anyway, there's a handful of details that are in here that your average fan on boxing Twitter, right? Or even more of a hardcore fan, that they don't even know. It's as if it's as if this doesn't even exist. And like I said, I'm not saying Dan Raphael should go and every other day post this on his Twitter like, hey guys, check this article. It's a scoop that they didn't allow me to have. You know what I mean? Hell no. I get that. But if you're informing people of something, instead of saying, I don't know, I don't know. My whole point is there is information out there. And a lot of people want to criticize, and also some of it constructive criticism, some of it just straight up obvious. Some of the things I've already said were pretty obvious as far as, negatives about the PBC. But if you're going to rip something with business, like on a business tone, then I think you should go all the way with it. Like, for instance, Ryan Cadwell is something that many, Steve Kim and many others have said is a shady business. That what Al Haymon and Ryan Cadwell potentially could be up to some really shady things here. And I don't know that to be true or not. That totally could be 100% true. I don't know. I'm just being honest with you. I have no clue. I have no clue if Al Haymon just completely bamboozled these investors to get his 15% cut. And that's what this whole thing was about. I'm going to get money for my fighters. And I'm going to, like it was just a scam, a Ponzi scam. That's what a lot of people call it. Right? I don't know that to be true or not. Okay? But there are some facts released, or at least some information that has been released from the people we're talking about that has to at least be acknowledged. I guess that's what I'm saying. And just in general, when we talk about they're out of money, well, there's some basic stuff here in this, in this article that really lays a lot of that out. For instance, the investment, right? And here's Ring, that attorney, the longtime associate attorney, whatever, of Haymon. He says the entire world of boxing was built on short money. What can I get out of this fight? What can I get out of a couple of weeks after that? And no one ever looked past it. And that's very true. Because when you look past it, it's a daunting investment. But when you get past the short to medium and you get to the long money, then it gets exciting. But nobody really ever wanted to take that risk, or it was a lot of investment. So there's a variety of things in here that people don't know. Like, oh, he just burnt it. This is just a waste of money. Well, we don't even know 100% what it was all spent on just yet, or what has been spent and what hasn't been spent, and how they got the money in chunks. Have they been cut off? We don't know a lot of stuff. But what we do know is Waddell and Reed, with this Ryan Cadwell, invested $1.5 billion in Formula One, F1 racing. Okay? So Ryan Cadwell does have experience investing in a sport. Totally different sports, but when you start to detail, when you learn detail of how the industry works and how it, pertains to TV advertising and selling the rights of these sports and all that, that is information that obviously is needed to do something like this, right? Obviously. And even the time buys themselves, it's not all, he didn't just time buy and that's it. It wasn't 100% time buy. A good chunk of it is, but they are making some rights fees. Bounce TV and Spike, and even some of these other ones. But Spike is not a rights fee all the time, but they do pay for some of them. So when we're looking at, well, where's their revenue stream coming from? Having a profit and having a revenue is two different things, obviously, right? Your revenue has to be a certain amount to cover your overhead to make your profit, right? Easy enough to understand. Everybody knows that. But as far as Cadwell goes, as far as him leaving Waddell and Reed to join Haymon Boxing and be a an executive there for a time, which is what he did, and then to start only advising him, right? So that's basically what the plan was. Now, is this a shady thing and ultimately illegal, and it's basically Cadwell and Haymon scammed everybody? Maybe in the end that's what it'll be. However, it literally states, Cadwell himself, and just in general, says that, the only way that Waddell and Reed will invest and give Haymon this money is if Cadwell joins to be kind of supervising to help him, show him the ropes, so to speak. Now, it doesn't mean he had decision of how the fights are going to go, right? And that kind of decision, but just being, on board. And that was the plan. So when people say, God, that was shady, dude, did you know that Cadwell he doesn't even work for Waddell and Reed anymore? Well, that, in the end, that may be shady. I don't know. I don't know about lawsuits, the outcomes of lawsuits. I do know a lot of people anticipated a lot of outcome from the top-ranked Bob Arum lawsuit, because remember, they were going to dig up Hoffa. We're going to find the bodies. You know what I mean? We're going to dig this up. This is good. We're going to really show what's going on here. We're going to get to the bottom of this, and they mutually dismissed it. Now, have we heard about a settlement? I'm not saying there wasn't a settlement. I don't know. But have we even heard a number for a settlement? Because when Oscar and Richard Schaefer parted ways, there was a settlement, and we at least heard a guesstimation of it. So he literally, like, if it was illegal for him to leave Waddell and Reed, and maybe it turns out to be, this is going to be a big, Ollie Act violation from Haymon, right? Maybe that's true, because, he does make all the decisions, and just because he, by law, technically pays a promoter to promote, you could see in a court of law, potentially someone could shape it, kind of like in a grand jury, where there may not be enough evidence that ties it directly, but there's enough where they put him at the bad place, bad time, he's involved, that type of thing. However, there's some detail in here that may or may not. My point is, if this is so shady what he's doing, why would he tell people about it? And in fact, he says in this that there's no way you won't get the investment money, basically, unless, I come there. Waddell and Reed won't do it. So to me, that's not shady. But maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We'll find out. But why would you tell everybody about it then? All right, I'm going to swindle these people out of their money, but I'm going to tell everybody about it. To me, I don't know. I'm not sure. Once again, I'm just trying to use logic, trying to separate some of this stuff. Also, when we talked about how long are they capitalized, do they have money? This is a direct quote from Cadwell. Al said, I think I can pull this off for X amount of money. And I turned around and said, absolutely not. It's X plus, or we don't do it. You have to be capitalized for 3 to 5 years to do this, to weather the storm, because in some regards, you were going to be an irritational player for a while. You've turned the model completely upside down. And he also framed it in Wall Street terms. They said they would risk 1% of a $40 billion fund in this. Now, that fund is nowhere near $40 billion anymore, but most of that has to do with the stock market and other stuff like that. It's not having to do with this PBC. I think that was kind of funny how, from last September to not this last September, 2 Septembers ago to December, I don't follow the stock market tightly, but they did have plenty of problems in that time. But I guess, and also in this article, here's a couple more pieces and then I'll just move on. Literally, they say it right here. When people say he's getting these 15%, he's getting this 15%, he don't care. He's getting rich off this. Well, if he got the 15% of his manager fee, that would be breaking the Ali Act because you're making money and you're also basically promoting. You're also running the whole operation. So, you couldn't take it, or that would be an Ali Act. I'm sure there's other Ali Acts that he potentially broke. I don't know. I'm just being honest. But it says right in here that the investors, once again, this is something they announced. This is something that they had permission to talk about. So it's a legitimate source to any other sources that we all go by, right? Even more because they're actually naming themselves. No, I shouldn't say even more. Either way, they said that 15% goes to the investors, that Al Haymon's not taking that 15%. That anything that goes to a Haymon fighter, 15% of it's going to go back to the investors. Which makes sense because then that would be a way to cover your ass for Haymon, right? What do you mean? I'm not doing an Ali Act in this category because I'm not making money on this. I'm not making my percentage off this. That's going back to it. And also, when people said, man, I think he just thought he could take over the sport and it just didn't happen. Well, this is another quote from Cadwell. He said, this is the thing we're incredibly self-aware of. We do not think that this is easy, that we show up and all of a sudden there's ratings, and those ratings are representative of advertising rack rates. And all of a sudden the world is a cheery place. We didn't capitalize the company based on that. What we anticipated was, a variety of things, he says, as far as what their mission is, their goal to broaden, to broaden the horizon or whatever, right? To get more people, more eyes. And the biggest thing before the PBC, one of the biggest complaints was activity and prospect and mid-level fights. Let's just say if at the end of the day that the best the PBC did was get more boxing on basic cable and more that in once in a while network TV, right? Let's say 2 a year, 3 a year, but more on basic cable. So more exposure, not just Friday night fights or once in a while the NBC Sports Network, or throwaway cards on that, or throwaway cards on the FS1 or whatever, or Fox Sports Net back then. But a real series, right? Like almost like Showbox, but on basic cable, that type of thing. And that was not what Friday Night Fights was. Let's be honest. I'm not saying the whole run of Friday Night Fights or even ESPN's whole run with boxing, because they have a long run with boxing. But one of the biggest complaint was exposure for the mid-level guys, the contender guys, and definitely the prospects. Well, if still the top level guys end up on premium cable, the big, like 2 big fighters facing off, if that turns out to be that's normally what it is, or usually that's on pay-per-view, right? And if that's all he accomplished, I'd still think that would be a positive for boxing. Let's say in a couple of years he ends up getting a small level deal and we're able to get more prospects and contender and mid-level stuff, like for instance, HBO has been the leader in boxing for a long time. They have a brand, clearly, right? And in many ways, they had to do what Al Haymon's doing to an extent. I shouldn't say in many ways, in a different method, but they did overpay fighters to get them on their network. That's just a fact. You know what I mean? They did have to pay. And now to get them off of premium cable, well, you're going to have to pay them to get them off premium, right? That, or at least logically, you think that. Now, some guys shouldn't be making that kind of money. And even if let's say your contract says you have to fight 3 times a year, and you only end up fighting twice. Well, sometimes those contracts for those 2 instead of 3, they can look a little bigger. Maybe he's not making $750,000 or $800,000, but it's combined because he only fought once this year. I don't know. I mean, we do know that, some of those purses that come out, that's not the whole story, But that was a big complaint. And now people I see like, oh, I miss Friday night fights. And I get it because it was on for 8 months out of the year on Fridays. So I get it. But the people that want to romanticize the last handful of years of ESPN, that's where you can just see your bias clearly. And just overall, it's one thing to have a criticism. It's one thing to rip a fight or a fighter or the PBC. But you can see clearly that there's a thick bias. And there's going to be a bias in everything. Right now, Golovkin is, a lightning bolt for like people praising him or people criticizing him. And the more popular you get, the more, more that's going to happen. You're going to have fanboys, you're going to have haters. You know what I mean? So some of that is just basic stuff. But some of this PBC stuff is just not true or fair or correct. And it's not about being fair. Life isn't fair, right? But to me, some of this stuff is over the top. Like it's mostly mismatches. Just the other day I was on Twitter, and I see this all over the place, that it's just a bunch of mismatches. Some dude said, well, they had like 300 fights, and there was good, 30 of them were good? Come on, dude. And like I said, if you're going to complain about Friday night fights, I've heard people say, well, like I heard people say, oh, I didn't watch a ton, but, it sucks that it's not on anymore, but I didn't watch it a ton. And I've seen people say, well, it wasn't that popular, but the mainstream liked it. Well, you can't have, that's listen to what that was just said. Like you can tell the ratings, the mainstream didn't watch it. You could just tell by the ratings. And I'm talking about the average ratings, especially the last couple of years of it, Because there was a time not that long ago anywhere, where, it was Wednesday night fights in the spring and summer. And remember when that went away, people were like, oh, are they going to put the Wednesday night budget and put it into Friday? It's going to be better. And we all thought, oh, that'd be cool. And that was not the case. They have baseball on Wednesday nights now, or have, for years now. But to act like there's not as much, or even more, I would argue more, prospect and mid-level stuff than what was the last like 3 to 4 years of Friday night fights. I watched it consistently. Some of it I would delete. Some of it I would turn. Some of it was garbage. Some of it was great. Some of it was in between. It was all over the place. I like that Boxino idea. That seemed to be a good idea. I like that. So I'm not dogging Friday night fights, but if you're going to be so nostalgic about it and romanticize it, that's not right either. Because between Estrella TV, toe-to-toe Tuesday nights on FS1, prospect fights are all over the place, and more than they just were. And some of them higher quality, or just the same, if not better. I think, and I'm not saying Estrella and FS1 is Showbox, but they do more shows than Showbox too. Like I always said that about ESPN. People dog it, and I say that's true, and I'd agree with some of their points, but it is easier to do a showbox once a month with a tad bit bigger budget than it is to do it on a weekly basis for 8 months, right? That's true. It is harder to do that. But my whole point is, and if you don't have Estrella TV, I don't have Estrella TV, I don't have Bounce TV, but both of those allow you to live stream that you can hook up right to your TV, to your computer, or let's say you missed it. Well, you don't have to worry about recording it because they have it right there on the ringtvlive.com and on bouncetv.com. You can literally go right to it. The archive's just waiting to watch. And I understand it's not ESPN2. And it's not right there. So I get that. But there's been a ton of prospect stuff. So some of these complaints about it's only mismatches. It's all mismatches. That's just bullshit. It's not true. It's not all mismatches. What are you talking about? And then, HBO finally got some criticism. The last couple of months, people have finally started to pile on HBO a little bit. Now, thankfully, they're closing strong. You know what I mean? They have a tendency in a tradition to close pretty strong. But they had a bad year. They had a down year, no doubt about it. Showtime beat them this year. I'm not saying Showtime was as good as it was in 2013 or, boxing was in general then, but that was a banner year. But it's not all mismatches, dude. And a lot of these perceived mismatches, I don't expect everybody. I mean, if you're a media member and that you do it for a living, yeah, they're going to watch damn near everything or almost everything. But I don't expect a normal fan to watch everything. You know what I mean? But to sit there and call everything a mismatch, that's bullshit. And a lot of it is, like, I understand if all you've been doing for the most part on social media or even as people that write articles, right? Reporters, and they write articles, not just reporters, but people that write blogs and do podcasts and all that. If all you've been doing is complaining about Al Haymon, then I get it. You're just going to join the club. Oh, yeah, they're all mismatches. But a good chunk of these mismatches, these perceived mismatches, turn out to be good fights. And some of them turn out to be good TV fights. And when others, Top Rank, Main Events, Golden Boy, when other promoters, smaller promoters as well, when they make good TV fights, they either get credit for it, which a lot of them do and should, or they don't get destroyed for it, right? They just, like, let's say the fight doesn't mean anything per se. It doesn't bring you to a next fight. It's just a good, entertaining fight. Where if I'm flipping through the channel and I'm a casual sports fan or a casual boxing fan and I see a fight and go, oh, this is pretty competitive, I'll stay tuned to it. But see, they don't get that. The PBC generally doesn't get that. And there was times when, especially early 2015 in it, not early 2015, the calendar, but PBC, there were some times where we completely destroyed some of their cards, and we still do. But we also admit, and a lot of people online can't do this. They can't admit when they're wrong. And since the PBC has come along, there's a couple of things that stand out to me. Result in the ring does not count like it used to. Once something is perceived a mismatch, it gets logged on or logged in, and it goes down as in people's minds as a mismatch. Okay? And I remember just kind of taking you through like Guerrero Martinez. Remember that fight? I didn't like it as a main event. A rule of thumb for stay busy main events, you better hook up the undercard then. You know what I mean? We say that a lot on the Rope It Up Radio podcast. Hey, if a name is staying busy or someone's staying busy, especially a name, then give me something on the undercard I can, put my teeth into. And I'm like, okay, this is a good fight. i.e., I think a good example would be Sergio Mora Part 2 and Jacobs. Not a lot of people were interested in that fight, right? But the co-feature gave us something to go, okay, you know what I mean? Here we go. Another one that we were ripping, and a lot of people, this is when a lot of people, it didn't take long for the wave to go negative with PBC, right? It didn't take long at all. And another thing was Molina, even though this was in PBC, but Showtime, it's all Al Haymon, Showtime and PBC anyway, right? So I was just kind of adjusting something there. If you think about it, like Wilder and Molina was another one that I didn't have a lot of good things to say about. But how did that turn out in the ring? How did Guerrero Martinez turn out in the ring? How did Duhaupas? A lot of people were down on, I think it's Duhaupas, right? Wilder. It was 2 Septembers ago on NBC. A lot of people said, Jesus Christ, this is horrible. Well, why? Why did we say that? Why did boxing fans say that in media? Because they didn't know Duhaupas really. But when you actually look at where Wilder was in his career, and you can comment on that however you want, but I try to take it fight by fight, card by card, fighter by fighter. Everybody's at a different level. Some dudes just got knocked out and needs to be moved laterally. Some prospect just got kind of exposed, so they got to take him a step back or move him laterally instead of 2 step forward. I think a lot of people thought or expected and want that Al Haymon would just do the best fights. And I agree with that. I think this year in particular, not just Al Haymon, but overall, we don't have a lot of the big fights that people, the Golovkin-Canelo, the Wilder-Povetkin thing got messed up. So there were some fights that you really wanted to see, and they didn't happen, the big ones. Now, we do have some. We have plenty of good ones, but I think that's what was kind of lacking. You know what I mean? But like Duhaupas and Wilder, okay, you can perceive it however you want, but once that bell rings, then I tune in as a fan. All the perceived stuff goes out the window, and I just watch the show. What happened to just watching the fight and see what happens? It seems like everybody on Twitter now is a professional matchmaker. And don't get it mistaken. Everybody has an opinion on a fight, obviously. When something gets announced, what do? What's your first instinct? I like that fight. I hate that fight. What the hell's up with that fight? It doesn't do much for me. Oh, that's great, You're going to have a reaction. That's called being a fan. But also being a fan but since I don't do this for a living, since I don't matchmake, I haven't taken a fighter from a prospect to a contender to a champion. Since I don't do that, maybe I should just not keep my mouth shut. I'm not saying that, but maybe I should just see how it turns out. You know what I mean? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? I mean, I think that's where we're kind of lost in some of this, to be honest with you. Some of it is, what the hell's going on? Sorry. I think my TV oh, you know what? I had it on pause. That's what it was. I meant to just turn it off. Anyway, what happened to just watching the fights, too? Have your opinions on it, and then you'll watch it. Or watch it on DVR, or stay off social media so it doesn't get spoiled, whatever the case may be. But to me, some of this stuff is just like, really, dude? So you're a professional matchmaker now. And it seems like so many people, not just in the media, but fans too, are just so hell-bent on labeling something, a fight, something that it's not. Sometimes it turns out to be that. Sometimes it turns out to be worse. And if you listen to the podcast, I've talked about the PBC forever. Now I'm back on YouTube, and this is my first PBC video or whatever, right? We rip fights. When Austin Trout took on Twinkle Figures or Twinkle Toes or Twinkle Fingers, whatever that dude's name is. That was shitty. When Quillen took on that that Chippendales dancer to lead us to Quillen on NBC during the afternoon, we ripped it. You know what I mean? I'm not saying don't rip them. That's not what I'm saying. But if the fight turns out better, I don't see a lot of people anymore anyway. I used to see this all the time. Like, I don't really have a ton of interest. I'm gonna give it a try, but I'm not really pumped about that fight. I'm gonna give it a try and be like, oh dude, we were way wrong. That was an awesome fight, and all of a sudden there's good energy off of it. It's not being butthurt about the situation. And like I said, if all you do is write articles and on Twitter and boxing forums, if all you do is rip the PBC, then I can understand. Because after these perceived mismatches, sometimes it's just crickets. Then all of a sudden you don't hear anybody talk about much. Right? I mean, you may have some PBC fanboys going, see, dude, this, that, the other, but and some of those aren't even fanboys, obviously, but the ones that will say something way over the top the other way then, But most of us aren't professional matchmakers. And even some people that organize events and help promote and help fighters, they have more insight on that stuff, but they're still not matchmaking. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But they're not. If you're not matchmaking on a regular basis, then you're not a professional matchmaker. Sorry. Or, if you've done it for years and now you're not doing it, that's different. You know the business. But I think that's one of the biggest things I've noticed about that is people literally think they're professional matchmakers now. But yet when the result comes out, like I said, it's either crickets or they're ripping the favorite, right? They're ripping the favorite. Look at Wilder. This just shows you how limited a ceiling he has, right? Or like a fight like, what's another fight? Okay, here's a fight. Figueroa against DeMarco. A lot of people ripped that fight. The reason I didn't rip the fight was, here's the reason why. Because I started learning my lesson on some of this. That, wait a second, let me think about this a little deeper. Right? And I had realized that there were several fights in about a 3-month span that got shitted on and they turned out to be good. Right? And it was coming off that Duhaupas when this got signed, whatever. So that's another one where I go, no, wait a second. Now, Figueroa had just come off a Ricky Burns fight, and Ricky Burns was past his prime. Ricky Burns is still past his prime. I know he's still fighting. I know he's winning belts, but look at who he's winning belts against. Okay? This is not to rip Ricky Burns. This is just give an example. Many people thought that Ricky Burns beat Figueroa. So Figueroa, and it was a tough fight no matter what. So Figueroa, who's been in a bunch of tough fights considering his age, is taking on DeMarco, which DeMarco in his last fight hadn't looked good, but in that Jesse Vargas fight, he didn't look horrible. He didn't look like, oh, dude, just retire, get it, just be done with it. And now against Bartholomew, it did kind of look like that to me. However, Bartholomew is a better fighter overall, skill, more power. He's just a way more polished, better fighter than Figueroa. And another thing is Figueroa was fighting at 140, or not really, right? He's fighting at whatever, 151 and 148, or, but he doesn't have a lot of power. So I figured, well, in this case, at this level, I don't mind this fight because what? It's a good TV fight. Figueroa's staying busy. He had a tough fight that many people thought he lost. He's going into a fight that will probably be entertaining. It'll be tough. And what was it? It was entertaining, and it was a good fight. It was a good fight. I'm not hailing it as fight of the year or top 5 fight of the year, nothing like that. But it wasn't a shitty fight. But what do you hear after that? Oh, Figueroa, dude, that just shows you. Look at his ceiling's just so low and he's exposed. And dude, we already knew that about Figueroa, though. So if you're gonna sit there and say they're all mismatches, at least watch the fights. At least watch the fights. I was talking, going back and forth with somebody on Twitter the other day, and they're like, well, those FS1, those prospect, those mid-level stuff, that doesn't even, I don't even care about that stuff. Well, okay then. Well, at least we get some clarification of what kind of boxing fan you are. And what I've also realized that a lot of people I thought were avid boxing fans are kind of in between a regular kind of run-of-the-mill boxing fan and the casual fan. They're definitely not casual fans, but they probably like about 6 fighters. They like a style of fight. And that's another thing, the style of fight. I totally understand if all you like is brawlers and that's all you're interested, that's cool. That's you. That's your opinion. That's fine. But how are you going to sit there and dog a fight that's still a legitimate fight? And nowadays boxing, the last 8 to 10 years, whatever, I'm happy to get as many legitimate fights no matter what the style matchup. Whether it's a good one, whether it's a war, whether it may be more of a chess match. I'm still not going to dog a fight because it's not the style I like. But it's a legit fight. Like DeGale and Durrell. We already went over the venue of that, right? And notice how they're not doing those afternoon shows anymore. But I saw people kind of saying, nah, I don't like the fight. I think it's a crappy fight. I don't like it because of the style. Well, cool, man. If you don't like it because of the style, that's fine. But to say that wasn't a legitimate good fight with like top 10, top 15 guys, if any top 10, top 15 guys are fighting, and it's not like somebody easily handled them and then they fought him again or something like that. I'm not saying that, but I'm gonna not rip that fight because we need all we can get when it comes to that. So some of this stuff, like prime time, the prime time shows, right? Last year, the first 3, if you think about it, they had a lot of big names. Thurman against Guerrero. Broner, he was fighting. Who was he fighting? Molina. Danny Garcia, Lamont Peterson. Quillen against Andy Lee. And then the one in June of 2015, that was Porter and Broner. But if you look at those fights, they weren't really good fights. The Thurman Guerrero, it was one-sided, and then it got good the last 4 rounds, right? Once he got knocked down, Guerrero, then all of a sudden it turned into a pretty good fight. The Quillen Lee, although they hit the canvas, it was pretty slow. I thought Lamont Peterson and Garcia was much slower than I would have anticipated. Broner and Molina was a slow fight, and Porter and Broner was a slow fight. So they had this overhead, but the fights weren't producing action. So some people were saying, well, instead of putting names and just names, why don't we put just good fights? And this year, even late last year, I'm talking about the Duhaupas and Wilder, which was entertaining. It was a good TV fight, and so was Figueroa DeMarco. This year, in primetime, people have said, oh, it's gone worse. Well, some of the ratings, sure, but as far as, what defines a successful or a good show as a boxing fan for you? Is it just tied to the rating, or is it tied to the action? I think that's a pretty good question. I think it's a combination of both, if you're going to talk about success. But if you got your enjoyment out of it, that they did their job as promoters and as the PBC to give us something to watch, right? That was good. If you look at the prime time, some of them they cut the budget on, right? It wasn't as many names, but they produced some good stuff. Let's go through it real quick. Garcia Guerrero. Now, Garcia Guerrero was ripped. It was ripped, right? It was ripped as some shitty showcase on prime time. This sucks. Okay. But in the ring, what was it, an 8-4 fight? Did Danny Garcia have some problems with Garcia at times, or with Guerrero? Yeah. Was it a good TV fight? Yeah. Was the undercard on paper was really good. Unfortunately, Martinez got hurt when he was taking on Sammy Vasquez. Was that card? I think it was. But the Mansoor and Brazil fight for heavyweights, that was a good fight. And if Mansoor hadn't had his jaw broken, who knows how that fight would end up? I mean, Mansoor looked like he was winning the fight. That was a good fight. So to me, that's a good card. 2 out of the 3 fights, all 3 of them on paper, or 2 out of the 3 on paper were good. But the main event actually turned out to be a good TV fight. I'm not going to complain about that. Now we go to mid-April, right? Because the March one got postponed, right, with Thurman Porter. Let's go to that prime time. Now, what was that? That was a good card. Glowacki against Cunningham. Did anybody have complaints about watching that fight? Was that a boring fight? I mean, Cunningham won plenty of rounds. He won rounds, but then he get knocked down, right? It was a good fight. The K-Rod against Marcus Brown, the middle fight there. Was that a bad fight? Was that given exposure to prospect/contender level guys? Sure was. And then Spence taking a step up to Algieri. Now, was it a one-sided slaughter? Yeah, but you got to admit that still was at that point his best opponent he had faced. And it delivered something to us, didn't it? It delivered a knockout. Now, flash forward, what was it, like 2-3 weeks later? The Victor Ortiz Berto card. A lot of people like that one. The first one, Jorge Lara, quick knockout. I thought that would be a funner fight. That didn't turn out. But the Rodriguez Thomas Jr. was a banger for how long it lasted. And then Ortiz and Berto was competitive. Berto went down, and he got a kind of a highlight reel punch in there that people like to see. Whatever. It's not a bad card, though. That's for sure. They didn't do one in May. They had done 2 in April. Then they did a fight that we ripped for a main event. Fonfara against Joe Smith. Once again, much like Duhapis, Joe Smith, even less than that. Joe Smith, nobody knew him. The only thing I said is the guy has some skill, and his loss was a broken jaw in 2 different places, if I recall. That he got a broken jaw, he tried to fight with, and then he broke it in a different place and had to give up. But how did that fight turn out? Now, I wish it would have been more than 1 round, but it's up there for upset of the year. Once again, I was wrong, like most of us. I was wrong. I'm willing to admit it. Now, on that card, they got Lubin some rounds. It wasn't a competitive fight, but they got him out there, whatever. I thought that guy would give him a little bit more, but he didn't. But the first fight was Payano and Warren. That was a competitive fight, just like the first one. That's not bad. That's not a bad card. That's not a shit card. Now, we don't even have to go into Thurman Porter. We know that was a great card. Now, the one I'll say, I liked some of the undercard stuff. I definitely like some of the undercard stuff. I liked the Vasquez-Felix Diaz fight, but I didn't like Wilder-Areola. I didn't like that. Would it have been a little bit more entertaining the way the first couple rounds were when Wilder was just kind of loose in there and letting his hands go and trying to score uppercuts until he messed up his hands? Sure, I guess, but I wasn't a big fan of that one. So, but the overhead on some of these cards weren't nearly the overhead for a Broner or Porter or a Thurman Guerrero with Broner on the undercard, or you know what I mean? So it's kind of like at times it's damned if you do and damned if you don't. And I'm not trying to just go there and everything. There's plenty of things, and I've laid several of them out that you can rip about the PBC and boxing in general. But I just don't see the amount of criticism when other things happen to other fighters or fights as much as you see with the PBC. Clearly. Right? So if you don't watch the fights, why you keep ripping fights you don't see when they turned out to be good, some of them. Like that Spike card in August. That Argentine cab driver. And obviously, I'm not ripping him. He literally was a boxer / he had a job, which, by the way, many do. We have fun saying, garbage man and, that thing, cab driver. But a lot of these fighters do have that. They do have jobs. Not the names, but a chunk of them do. But that's a perfect example. Who saw that upset coming? Not me. I ripped it. I thought it was just filler on the undercard, too. That's kind of a mixed bag of stuff. My whole point is, I just don't, like we said, they overkilled last year. Now they're tweaking it, and they go through some gaps where they don't have fights, and now, that means it's dead. But just recently, in Michael Woods, an article he wrote, he said that Tim Smith did say that they're going to release the rest of their schedule next week for 2016 and also some dates for 2017. Now, what that means, I don't know. I don't know if they're just going to do dates. I don't know if they have some fights lined up for the next year. I mean, I do know they have fights lined up. I don't know if they're going to actually release, like Garcia Thurman. Well, Garcia has to get past whoever he's going to fight November 12th to be able to get there. You know what I mean? So when we talk about it's dead, it's over, it's not dead. People have been saying it's been dead since 6 months ago. I just think that instead of being a professional matchmaker on Twitter, why don't we get back to being boxing fans? We saw this with Mayweather and Pacquiao when all of a sudden just a chunk of people got it's one thing for fights. Like even my grandfather, when Sugar Ray Leonard and Hagler fought, we were on opposite sides of the room. I like Deion Sanders. He likes Barry Sanders. You see what I'm saying? So I liked Barry Sanders too. I'm just saying he liked Barry Sanders a lot because he went there and gave the ball to the ref. Deion was high-stepping before he got in the freaking end zone. He had a problem with that. I didn't. So I'm not saying we can't have debates and go nuts on stuff. Of course we can, but some of this stuff is, it's all mismatches. It's all a mismatch. Everything's a mismatch. It's just bullshit, and it's not true. So why do you keep fanboying it? A lot of these guys say stuff about fanboys, but they're fanboys themselves. I think this Golovkin situation is really showing that. Either fanboy or haters. Some guys just go so far into hating Golovkin, you're like, dude, what are you talking about? Some of these guys aren't wanting them to fight them. Some other situations, I think he should maybe take a fight with somebody, like an Arislani Lara, just to stay busy, because that's what he's doing anyway in a lot of these fights, and to prove a point. Okay, there's a perception out there that I won't take on Arislani Lara. He's this slick guy. Nobody wants to fight him. All right, then I'm going to beat him. And I think he would beat him. I'm not saying if he fights Arislani Lara, I'm good to go. But, you're always going to have bias towards a fighter or a style or whatever. But to me, it becomes just a war of back and forth. And where does that get us as boxing fans? Where does it get us as a sport? But I don't know where it's going to end up. The last time there was filler or no big name scheduled was last 2014 from September to December. I think Devin Alexander and Amir Khan was like the biggest names fighting in those 3 months. I remember Fonfara took on a dude's named Dudu, and that really the fight actually was good. It was competitive, because most people can be competitive with Fonfara anyway, but it just was kind of fitting to what they were putting on. Dudu, filler. A lot of the stuff was. So, because we also hear of a potential deal with Fox right now. Even Kathy Duva says she heard about this rumor. People have heard this rumor, and it's not just from the boxingscene.com forum. You know, it's not just the forum that some dude who said, I work at the firm, the law firm that is dotting the I's and crossing the T's for a long-term deal with Fox. I'm not here to tell, I never said that, oh, this is going to work or it's not, or here they're going to get a deal or they're never going to get a deal. I've never said any of that. I just kind of tried to use a bunch of angles to tell you potentially why they couldn't and why they could. If you look at some of the ratings on a Tuesday night for FS1 or just in general, some of their sports on there, the ratings are kind of low for some of the sports. And then when you look at the payout, when you look at a 6 or 8 or 10-year deal that they gave somebody, some sport, and then you look at the ratings, you go, huh. You can also look at the number of events that, lined up against hockey, boxing or the PBC and hockey, and how that lines up, Sometimes people rip those primetime numbers. Oh, most of the times they do. And some of them have been really low. But now that I've gotten to see the NHL, the MLB, even NBA, some of their ratings, you go, huh. So they do have some bad ones or whatever. My point is I'm not here to tell you if they're going to get a deal or not. But I'm also here not to sit there and say, oh, it's dead because of all the mismatches. I mean, I got news for you. Nobody in the first year would put their whole roster together in big fights. Nobody would do that. If you have a large roster and you're just going to match them all in 1 year, it's just not, business-wise, it doesn't make a ton of sense. Now, if you only had 1 year of funding, yeah, then it would. But I think the building to fights, the promotion of these fighters in fights, leading to bigger fights, is some things that they need to improve on drastically, 100%. And I'm not out here trying to defend the PBC, and I'm not out here saying it's going to take over boxing. But if they are funded for 3 to 5 years, it could land a deal. I mean, especially if it were to land a deal, how many boxers would just let their contracts run out and join Al Haymon? I don't know. There's also the problem of if it doesn't work, right? If the PBC doesn't work, what are you left with? Well, then it's like a mass migration. Is it buyouts? I mean, then it's just a big mess. You know what I mean? It's a huge mess. So a lot of people saying boxing is dead and Al Haymon killed it. I just don't see that. I don't see boxing dead, and I don't think Al Haymon killed it. I don't think Al Haymon killed boxing all by himself. No, he didn't. So to me, it's kind of a rule of thumb to take every fight card and judge it how it just should be judged, straight up, whether it's on HBO or Showtime or – because remember, not long ago, 2013, some people were saying because Showtime and Golden Boy were doing so good that some people were saying HBO is going to be out of the business, dude. They're done. Oh, obviously that was a ridiculous statement. Obviously. Now, they had a bad year, and I'm glad that they're finishing strong, but I think this has just been a hit or miss year. It started really slow. It picked up really nicely and then fell off. Then like June and July, it picked up really nicely and then it kind of fell off. September was awesome. Now it's kind of fallen off. So, you know what I mean? It's been a hit or miss, really up and down year. But it hasn't been the worst year in boxing ever. It hasn't been as shitty as people are saying. But then again, it also hasn't been anything like 2013. All right? So, anyway, long story short, I don't know what the hell's going to happen with the PBC. That's above my pay grade. Does FS1 on their network need content? Yes. Could they get a decent sized deal? Potentially. Maybe they could get a long term deal. I have no clue, man, because I'm not a TV executive and I don't work underneath one. I don't know. I mean, you could look at Tuesday night ratings there, and when Tuesday night Toe to Toe Tuesdays do their show, they're clearly the highest rated thing on that day. Now, 200,000 or 168,000 doesn't sound like much, but I mean, people want to call First Take this popular show. Well, go look at their ratings. Even their peak ratings that are not peak ratings, but even their like after sports, or during like a halftime where there's already, 10 million watching or something. I'm not saying that. I'm saying look at last year's. Obviously, they were going to take a hit because Skip left for First Take. But look at they weren't averaging a million a show or nothing like that. Go look at their average right now and tell me that's a huge show. But it's content. They paid Skip a bunch of money. Now that's pretty much every day though, too. I'm just trying to say, like, you could throw up a bunch of numbers and info, and I try to learn about some of this stuff, but I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm an expert like a good chunk of people do online. And it just gets old, as if you know what you're talking about. None of us really, truly, or I shouldn't say none of us. A good, a vast majority of people in the finance world and in the ratings world, they don't know. All I know is the CBS Sports Network doesn't do good ratings per se. They need content, and so does FS1, potentially. And Bounce TV is another one that's a growing network. I know a lot of people go, what the hell is a Bounce TV? That's a joke. Well, okay, but they're paying for some of that product. So, long story short, there's all sorts of rumors. Like I said, the rumors ranging from being dead to a new deal. I mean, who the hell knows? I'm not a Waddell and a Reed investor. I don't, you know what I mean? I'm not going to sit there and act like I know everything about that, like a lot of people do. So to me, moral of the story is, if you think a fight's going to be a mismatch, cool. If it turns out to be a good fight, don't log it down in history. Obviously, that's kind of dramatic, but I just said down in history. But don't log it as a mismatch then. I just want to get to a place where results in the ring do count too. It sounds strange even saying that. I remember, and I've said this to a variety of people, even like Al Bernstein. Several of us, including him, were going back and forth. And I'm not saying I have, I talk to him on the phone or nothing like that. That's not what I'm saying. But to me, when did we get to a place where result in the ring doesn't count? How biased can you be to say nothing but mismatches? And then when they do get a great fight, they already go like Thurman and Porter, right? They're already saying, yeah, but it wasn't as good as this one. When did we get to a place where when a great fight is over, we go automatically into a debate as if, no, but this one was better? Oh, Jesus, can't we just, when we get nice things, can't we like love them for a little bit? Maybe that's why we can't have nice things, boxing fans. Anyway, I'm out of here, man. This has been a long-winded video. I apologize if it's been boring for you at times, but this is the first video I did. I just want to kind of do something and then move on. I don't want to keep talking about, stuff where you're just kind of hitting your head after a while. This is just out there. It's topical. We've talked about it on the podcast several times, especially right now, because a lot of people think they're completely out of money. Maybe that'll be true. Maybe next year, by mid-year, they're done. I have no clue. Anyway, check out the Rope-A-Dope Radio podcast at blogtalkradio.com/Rope-A-Dope. You can check it out and subscribe and download on iTunes. Follow me at Rope-A-Dope Radio on Twitter. Peace.